It's about being really clear about your intention and what you're wanting to deliver, and then thinking about how you break that down into a collection of key moments that fundamentally deliver on that promise.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good middle of the night, whenever it is that you happen to have me in your ears. Thank you and welcome to Dirty Linen. My name is Dani Valent and I love having the food chats and bringing you stories from all aspects of the food and hospitality world. When I think about writing about restaurants in my life as a restaurant critic, I often think that I am perhaps a little bit better at describing the feel than the food. Of course, food, wine, cocktails, all of that is so important. But I think what really gets me in and helps me fall in love with a venue is the way that it feels. That is a pretty hard thing to talk about, but today's guest is somebody who thinks about the hospitality experience more than most. His name is Robert Nudds, and he is part of Studio Round, a design studio and agency that has worked on such hospitality venues as Gimlet, Apollo Inn, Bray, Melbourne Place, the Market Pavilion at Chadstone, Daphne, which is coming up by long-time favourite of the podcast, Hannah Green from Etta, and Residence at the Potter Museum of Art, which we recently chatted about on Dirty Linen as well. Robert, welcome to Dirty Linen.
Hi, Jenny. Thanks for having me.
What do you do? What does your work involve?
My role at Studio Round is the head of strategy, and that means helping brands identify a unique place to stand. And I think what we've identified with some brands, particularly hospitality businesses, is how do we actually ground what feels like a sort of an esoteric concept of strategy into something that is tangible and can be experienced on the ground by a restaurant's customers and delivered in those venues every single day by the restaurant staff. So really, I'm here to help deliver, unique brand experiences that help businesses, but I guess in terms of this podcast, particularly, hospitality-driven businesses stand out and be chosen by customers.
So how does it fit into the physical design of a restaurant? I feel like people hear this word agency or, experience, creative. It's easy to sort of get lost in what it actually means. I know that what you do is all about making things tangible. Like how much of it is physical and how much of it is experiential? Or is that the wrong question?
No, I think it's a good question. I think what we talk about is trying to make it tangible. So I think there are a number of key components within a restaurant experience that are physical. I'm going to eat something, I'm going to drink something, and I'm going to do it in a hopefully a beautifully designed environment or a purpose designed environment. But then there's also service, which is another critical component, which some would say is not a physical experience, but we still have an interaction with that all the time. So I think for us, it's about trying to look at and think about all of those sort of different components of a business model and of a restaurant experience, and somehow have a deliberate point of view on how do they actually make people feel, because that's what really an experience is. At the end of the day, it's about dialing into an emotional response that hopefully becomes much more memorable and makes people feel something and helps to get traction or helps us to become repeat customers or advocate on that behalf, because we really fall in love with a restaurant experience or a particular dish or a particular kind of drink, which are very physical kind of experiences.
So what are some details or design elements that you've brought into a venue that perhaps I haven't noticed, but it has changed the way that I feel about an experience?
Well, look, there are so many, and I think what's really interesting about this podcast is looking at that behind the scenes kind of model of what happens and what goes on in a restaurant that people might not notice. Running a restaurant's an incredibly difficult business. There are so many hundreds of little decisions that you've got to make all of the time. So we kind of help to identify some of those that can have the most impact. And I think one of the restaurants that you've mentioned is Bray, and in some ways that's probably one of those restaurant experiences that is at a very high level. Dan and Jules and their team have worked really hard over the years to reduce the seating capacity from 40 down to 28 now, so the quality of the food and the experience can get even better. They go into such depth as growing their own wheat to be able to serve you bread in a restaurant. Now, we didn't have anything to do with that, but what we helped Dan identify very early on is that his whole philosophy was about putting the identity of Burugara on a plate. So how does he extract terroir, maybe, or the kind of there's some sense of what that place is and actually put it on a plate. And so things like thinking about, well, what are the plates? Where do those plates come from? And as one example, and we worked with them to identify an opportunity to team up with Cone 11 Ceramics to go and extract clay out of the dam on the property to use that clay to produce plates that people then get served the food on. And I think that's a very maybe a sort of a slightly obvious way to then talk about how do you put an identity of a place on a plate by turning it into the plate and building on the experience for there. So it's that kind of thinking around, once you've got a clear philosophy, how do you then bring in some key signature gestures that might reflect that, the uniforms, the table settings that are flowers from the garden, all of those things are very deliberate acts of expressing that identity of Burugara in that incredible restaurant.
Wow, I love that. I actually have a Cone 11 browser window open among my 50 million browser window tabs. But I just love their ceramics. And you've actually thrown me back to some of those dark days a few years ago when I bought a Cone 11 vase from Bray as part of some fundraiser. I can't remember what it was, but I love that vase and just the weight of it, the way it sits on the shelf and holds flowers. It's so, it looks beautiful, empty. Just absolutely love those ceramics, which I've also recently appreciated at Barragunda on the Mornington Peninsula. So thank you for making me think of those.
And I would dare say, Dani, that vase probably takes you back to that Bray experience and helps you remember that as well when you see it, or maybe when you put some flowers or something in it. And I think it's that idea of leaning in on how do we evoke memories, how do we create more memories through the experience that is really the focus for that kind of work that we do.
Yeah, I love that. So I'm assuming, Robert, it's great if you're brought in as a restaurant is being built or created, but presumably you also come in to sort of, retro brand or retro brainstorm the experience at a place. How does your role change for different gigs?
I think, look, that ideal model of starting from the beginning, from scratch, or in that kind of perfect scenario, I think does help. And we've been brought in on some projects, whether they're for hotels that don't yet exist, and defining a philosophy for how they might think about setting that up through the experiences that they offer as retail experiences. So bringing other operators in, defining the kind of physical environment and working closely with architects like Kennedy Nolan on Melbourne Place, for example, on how do you start to create what is a really unique experience, both for guests of the hotel, but also for visitors, for the hospitality experience. So I think that's the ideal model. But again, if I go back to Bray, that has continued to evolve over the years. And there's another restaurant that we worked on with Josh Emmett in Auckland in New Zealand, and he was the head of Gordon Ramsay restaurants globally for some time, and he ended up moving back to to New Zealand, which is where he hails from, and he had a restaurant over there that he was wanting to start up called Guilt, but he also had another more fine dining restaurant up the road called Onslow, and so we were able to kind of work on both of those to make sure that they were quite different experiences in the market. And Guilt has launched to become very successful. And with Onslow, we were able to kind of evolve that offering and the experience with them to actually help it become more fine dining. And it actually had a positive commercial benefit. It put, I think, something like 40% on sales over this following sort of 3 months after the work that we did with them. So it has some tangible experiences, but it's also got some quite tangible results as well.
How do you think you did that? I mean, that is such an amazing statistic. Like, what that you brought to the project do you think fed into that bottom line?
Well, I think, what we try to do is make sure that we're really clear on what is the idea, or what is the philosophy, what's the proposition of the restaurant, and that really then anchors the story. And for us, it's then about trying to make sure that all of the other components that you can control are then focused around doing that. So one of the ambitions that they had was to become New Zealand's most Onslow was to become New Zealand's most iconic dining experience. And we looked at, for example, one of the elements that we thought that they were sort of underperforming in slightly was their drink experience. When you first walked in, you noticed the bar, but it was actually it was a sort of practical area. It was there designed for the bar staff to make drinks, for the service staff to come and pick up off the counter and take to people at tables. And so we looked at, I guess, drinks as one example of how do you then transform that drinks experience and make it so the bar is something where customers can gravitate towards. It's very apparent when you first walk in, and make it so that the bartenders are actually engaging in storytelling as they're drink making to engage customers in what the drinks are all about, why those specific cocktails are on the menu, and what's interesting or relevant about it. New Zealand gin Negroni, for example. So really helping to, I guess, put some new emphasis and focus on things like drinks, and then looking at the wine list, which, to be frank, the wines were probably too affordable. So we said, well, actually, if you think about pricing strategy, you need to have some much more expensive wines on there so that people gravitate towards that middle, and the average price of the bottles of wine that they started selling after that went up significantly. So those are some ways of helping to address what is a product gap by integrating it into a physical experience at the bar, a service experience by having a conversation with the bar staff, but also, a slightly more strategic way of thinking about your drinks list to change pricing.
So is there any aspect of the restaurant experience that you don't look at? Because it sounds very broad. I suppose restaurants, as you say, restaurants are such complicated businesses. I think of them as these brilliant machines that when they hum, it's just so amazing to be a cog in the wheel. But anything that is jarring can ruin or diminish the whole experience. So, are there parts that you feel like, oh no, that's off limits, that's not our remit, or is it just you'll just look at anything?
Well, I think what we try to do is play an integration role between what are some of those experiences. So, for instance, architecture, we don't do the architecture. We work with, hopefully great creatives who are bringing that component. The restaurateurs themselves are great at food and drinks and service and those other kind of components. But what we do is we have a point of view, I guess, on how do all of those kind of core elements come together and tell a coherent story. And I guess we get to look at them and say, well, I think based on the story we want to tell, there is an opportunity for us to be better here or do less of something over there. So that's kind of really how we would think about it.
And do you ever feel like, so I appreciate a coherent brand story. I guess we're sort of built to as humans who tap into story, but sometimes I feel like things can be too slick or too engineered, or the brand story is too obvious. I know what I'm supposed to do next, rather than, I suppose, just tipping into an experience. Does that make sense to you? Is that something that you feel like you're you see or that you try to avoid?
Yeah, look, absolutely. And I think and that's the thing, like I'm talking about, controlling certain elements of an experience. And that's not to say we want to script them. I think an integral way that we think about a philosophy is to have principles around that. So how might we think about delivering great customer service and make that genuine and authentic to a restaurant and not script it to the point where the staff turn out like robots and ask you if you want to have fries with that. Of course, it's completely different. It needs to be personally driven at that level, but also relevant for that brand. So another example of a restaurant that we worked on, and you've mentioned Hannah Green and Etta, we worked on that originally with Hannah, and her intention to be a neighbourhood wine bar in Brunswick means that the sort of service model needs to feel very genuine and very connected to that place and be really human and authentic in the way that it's delivered. So you don't script it, you just help frame a point of view that that the owner and that the operators will be able to kind of empower their team to deliver on.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I mean, to pick on Hannah, she does have such a presence and a point of view and a warmth, and it feels like it would be so obvious, intrinsic to her to deliver that neighbourhood experience for her customers. But are you saying that, even if someone has those qualities themselves, to be able to articulate them in some kind of form so that, the new staff members that come in are sort of ahead of the game to realise the project of the restaurant? Is that some of the work that you do?
It is, absolutely, because I think that's the key, is that, in any high touch sort of service experience environment like that, it's a bit of a cliche, but you're kind of only as good as your last interaction. So if Hannah's ever not there, or if she's wanting to have, build a great team and great service philosophy and have and empowered her people to be able to deliver on that experience, you somehow need to be able to, I guess, codify it or to document it in a way that enables other people to pick up on what Hannah sees as her core principles of the way that service should really be run. So it helps to, I think, tease out what the sort of the key people, whether that's the sommelier or the chef or the owner and the front of house, team. What are those kind of key, principles that we want to actually make sure everyone has a great experience with, and make it feel authentic. To your point, it can't be scripted, but I think the ethos behind what you want that experience to be, it needs to be able to come through whoever is delivering it, but delivering it in their own unique kind of way. So,
what kind of document or manifesto do you leave businesses with, or is that bespoke?
Well, we have a framework, and I guess we look at each place individually around what their kind of different needs are. But we've created a unique strategic framework that we call an experience philosophy, and that experience philosophy then breaks the business model down into some core constituent parts. And it's probably not hard to imagine that it's food and drink are two of those key areas for a restaurant. And you then kind of can develop a philosophy around that. And so, if you want to be a sort of a brasserie, you would have a kind of core menu and a core kind of wine list that might reflect that style of dining institution, and it might have a stronger focus on continental wines because you want it to feel like a European brasserie, and so you can have a key drinks philosophy that sort of underpins that experience, and the food would similarly be reflected of that. Now, some of those people as sommeliers might have an individual sommelier philosophy, but actually that's got to be tailored, we think, to the operation, to the actual restaurant, so that it's coherent rather than it being an individual who might come and who might go. Like, the restaurant industry is famous for really great people moving around. So how do we make sure that there's a philosophy that guides what that restaurant looks like to operate, and so that those beliefs stay true, independent of who the key people are that are there to deliver it.
So, Robert, tell me about the experience philosophy at Gimlet, which is, a magical place to enter. And it feels like everybody knows what they're there to do. What have you brought to that?
We didn't do an experience philosophy for Gimlet. Andrew is an incredible person to work with. He's and he really owns all of that. I think Andrew has got a real secret sauce of being able to tap into the cultural zeitgeist and know what's going on and know what's going to work, know what people really want and need. He's also an incredible operator. And I think one of the things that he does is has great people, and his staff training is, I would argue, better than anyone else's. And that's why you can have such great experience at his places. We worked with him on Cutler & Co. when it first opened on Gertrude Street. It was kind of, quote unquote, the wrong end of Gertrude Street. There was a methadone clinic on the other side of it, on the other side of the road. And everyone thought he was mad for doing it, putting a fine dining restaurant on that end of Gertrude Street. But we all know what's happened there now. He's turned that into an incredible restaurant that's continued to evolve. And now there's Marion, which is, which we were lucky enough to be part of, and Morning Market there as part of that whole kind of strip, which is, one of my favourite parts to spend time in Melbourne.
So did Studio Round not have any involvement in Gimlet over the years?
We did the brand identity, and which then means things like the menu and the wine list and things like the coasters and those sort of marks and the for Gimlet. So we did probably a more traditional response for Andrew and Gimlet in that regard. Yeah. Which is some very similar scopes that we did with him for Marion and others as well. Cumulus originally too.
I feel like I've taken home a coaster from Gimlet, which is probably the kind of thing that you love to hear when you've designed a mark like that for a business.
Yeah, look, absolutely, and these days you see it on the references on social media as well in terms of how people snap that experience and post about it online. That's often there's some of us take physical reminders. I think I'm probably in that more in that generation, Dani, but others are like posting photos of themselves with cocktails and coasters and things, and the brand I think helps to amplify that engagement and amplify that reach for something like that through some of those channels. But again, I think if it's a great experience, people are much more willing to or desiring that idea of picturing themselves and depicting themselves in that environment, having that experience to people, on Instagram and other channels that says something about how they want to be seen by other people because they're having a great time.
Yeah, for some reason, I really feel like a martini now. So we love to be useful on this podcast, and, it's amazing to get these insights into the work that you do at Studio Round. But I would also love you to assist people who perhaps don't have the benefit engaging your services. Like, how might a business owner or a manager look with fresh eyes at their restaurant when they walk in the door? What could they look at tweaking to make the experience more seamless and more engaging and gripping for their customers? It's a great question, and it's something that I think is in a lot of ways quite hard for an owner to do when they're working really long hours and is try to kind of walk it back in that front door and be objective. But I think for me, it would be about starting with having a really clear aspiration for what you're wanting to actually deliver. What is that idea behind the restaurant in terms of what you want to stand for, and then try to look at some individual components that whether that's the physical environment and how the entry experience, for example, makes you feel, and what you're actually greeted with, how people greet you, as well as what you see, and try to almost identify individual elements. And I think the key advice in that is probably understand where you can have the most impact. Like, look for specific elements, whether that's the flower arrangements or the way that tables are
set up before you enter, or once if they're set up once you've landed with cutlery and crockery and glassware, things like that, that give you a different opportunity to have a conversation with your customers as you're putting glassware down and pouring wine, maybe rather than them being preset. Things like that I think help to try to really define what is the sense that people will get of being in that place, and try to look at them all as kind of tactical opportunities, so to speak, to sort of turn the dial in some way and align what that experience is in terms of what is the story you want to tell, what's the experience you want to give people. Yeah.
I love my first question as a reviewer is, what is this restaurant trying to be? Who are they? Who are they signalling that they are? And then how well do they succeed on their own, according to their own criteria? And then later down the track, it's like, do I like it? Like, are they doing it well? But I suppose it is that fundamental question of identity. It's pretty hard to feel right as a restaurant if you don't know what you're trying to do. Do you ever see restaurants that feel pretty confused? And I mean, are there any telltale signs?
I feel yes. I think unfortunately on a semi-regular basis, I think the telltale sign is usually the staff and the interaction that you have with people when you go in. I feel like the ability for the people in the restaurant to be able to engage with you and talk you through a menu or tell you what the specials are, I think are pretty clear indicators for me that if things are, if it's going to be a great experience or not.
It's so hard for operators, though, isn't it, in small businesses to have that consistency of staff. As you say, staff move around a lot. There's a, ongoing shortage of experienced front of house staff, particularly. It's such a challenge. Sometimes I wish restaurants did more work with their menus or other ways of communicating their offering, because, even the most willing staff may not be able to nail it for every table.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there are ways around that. Like we're working, with a restaurant up in Sydney at the moment who's got quite a focus on the garden and telling that kind of, paddock to plate story. And there are ways, but they also kind of can be a reasonably high volume and special occasion restaurant as well. And there are ways that we think that they can help to retain a core menu, but then actually empower the team with something that is quite reflective of the season, that's quite reflective of what's prolific in the garden at that moment, and think about that for some seasonal specials, yes, but in terms of food, but also in terms of the drinks and the flavorings that you can put in there. So I think if you're really clear on that and you think about that, you can really empower your team to actually be able to own that. And that might be, a couple of dishes or a couple of drinks that are just augmenting what is your core menu that is reasonably well known and understood, and so that the staff have actually got something that they can really talk to and talk about a core element of and belief set of that restaurant, which is about how are we bringing the garden into the restaurant? How are we helping people to experience this and taste the seasons, through the products that we're serving, so I think if you can figure out how to break it down and give and empower the team to plug into it and find a unique way for them to tell that story and be part of it, then I think that's always useful.
I think it's also about not being too aspirational, not overreaching in your messaging or your pitch. I'm thinking, you sort of, when you talk about garden to plate, it's like so many restaurants talk about, the garden, and then you find out they're using one leaf of parsley. And I think, it's hard to get away with that these days when some restaurants, let's lean on Bray again, are doing it to an extraordinary degree. Of course, it's easier in the regions and, all of that. But I just think don't overreach. I was looking at a restaurant's website the other day and they talk about that they use native Australian produce. I was like, that's exciting. I didn't know these guys did that. And then look at the menu and there's absolutely no evidence of it. Do you think, don't over egg it. Don't pitch yourself in something that you can't carry through on. I think it's the intention might be to get there, but keep it to yourself until you're able to follow through with the staff, with the experience all the way, to the plate. It's not just about signalling your ambition. You've got to actually carry through in the moment.
And I think, and Dani, I think you've sort of hit right on the head there of what that experience philosophy is. It's about being really clear about your intention and what you're wanting to deliver, and then thinking about how you break that down into a collection of key moments that fundamentally deliver on that promise. And that's not contrived. That's actually being true to who you are. It's been true to what you believe in, and it's been true to the customer experience that you're there to create.
Yeah, I think people can think of branding as this layer on top. Just like polishing something. But I suppose what you're saying is that it's really integral and at the core of what you're doing. And then those touch points are merely an expression of something that you're really certain about.
Exactly. I think if branding is a veneer that you're applying to the outside, then it's kind of topical, but it doesn't last very long. We sort of see brand as being as operational as it is everything. Brand involves all elements of your team and of the business as well. I've talked about the food and the drinks and the physical environment as much as more so than I've talked about a menu or a sign on the front door. So brand for us is about having all those elements aligned and telling a coherent story and being really clear on what is the capability of your team, from the sommelier and the chef to the maitre d' and all of their teams that work with them, and being and setting out a stall of what your ambition is to be able to deliver on and giving it your best shot of actually doing that.
Yeah, it must be very satisfying for you when you can sort of help someone hone their vision and then bring it to life.
It is. We've had tears of joy, I might hasten to add, when we've done that in the past. It's a great joy, because what we get to do is work with really good operators and it's their vision and it's their story. It's not ours. It's not contrived in that sense. We just help them to define it in a way that's we've got a framework. We help them to define it in a way that is true to them and that ultimately can be believed and experienced by their customers. And so it's kind of, I think it just helps to empower people and seeing that make a difference in those high touch environments and difficult to run and operate environments is actually it's really great. It feels great.
So what, Robert, do you think what personal qualities or qualifications do you bring to this work? Like, what is it in you that finds satisfaction in all of this?
Well, I went to university and studied an arts degree and quickly realised that wasn't going to get me a job. So I ended up studying, did a trade certificate in professional cookery. So I actually have a background, and then I opened up my own restaurant in New Zealand with my sister. So I do have some, operational experience in that space. I do know, what it's like to work in a kitchen. I was, nowhere near as good a chef as the people that I get to work with these days, but I have an understanding of those environments, but also as the head of strategy for Realm, where I've worked for over 20 years with Andrew McConnell and people like T. Yazard and Dan Hunter and Hannah Green and some other and Josh Emmett, some other really great people. There's a sort of unique point of view that you can develop on what makes those places work and the types of qualities that they are. I think it's also important to live in those worlds, like go out and enjoy being in those environments, enjoy being surrounded by great food or great architecture. I think it's important to kind of live in that world too.
Yeah, I love it. And so, Robert, finally, let's leave the listeners with something pretty tangible. I know you're all about making the ineffable tangible. So let's give people some really great words of advice for perhaps if they're thinking about opening a restaurant, making that leap. Like, what are some good questions that they should ask themselves?
Well, I think fundamentally ask yourself, why you're here. Like, what is it that you're wanting to deliver? What's your unique philosophy on what you can bring? That's true to who you are, and give it your all to deliver on that promise and that potential. It's hard, but and restaurants industry these days is even harder than it has been. So I think you owe it to yourselves to be really deliberate about where you can actually dial up the experience that you're creating and make it more memorable for your customers and more true to who you are and what you're really trying to achieve.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for chatting to us, and thanks for the great experiences that I didn't even know I was being led through in all those lovely venues. I'm sure your words of advice will be really helpful to people. Thanks, Robert. Appreciate your time and your insights.
Thanks so much, Dani. Pleasure talking to you.
This is Dirty Linen, and I'm Dani Valent. We air the issues that the hospitality industry finds hard to talk about, hearing from different people with unique perspectives. We want to hear from you as well. If you have something that needs to be said about a topic, get in touch so we can include your perspective. Contact us at dirtylinen@deepintheweeds.com.au or hit us up on Insta at Dirty Linen Podcast. We can't wait to hear from you.
This is a Deep in the Weeds production.